When construction crews demolished the bridge my great-grandfather constructed, I resolved to transform their expensive lakeside development into worthless, muddy ground. At dawn on a Tuesday morning, while enjoying coffee by the water, I heard heavy machinery approaching. Emerging from the fog, a bulldozer headed toward the stone structure my ancestor had personally assembled in 1923. This same crossing had served our neighborhood for a full century. The bridge a particular HOA leader had deemed unsightly. Linda Prescott and her board members were unaware of Texas water law specifics. My ancestor hadn't merely constructed that bridge, he'd maintained control of the dam infrastructure. I'd recently acquired something more influential than HOA regulations: lawful authority to empty their lake completely. Please share your thoughts below. How would you respond if your family heritage faced destruction? Tell me your location. I'm curious how many have encountered these authoritarian homeowner associations. I go by Jake Morrison and work as a civil engineer. 3 months back, I came into possession of stunning lakefront land. My ancestor Samuel Morrison constructed our family retreat in 1920 after returning from World War I. His greatest accomplishment was the bridge itself. Samuel didn't simply throw together wooden planks carelessly. He personally extracted limestone from nearby quarries and constructed an authentic stone arch bridge linking our lakeside property to the primary route. For an entire century, this crossing served the community. Anglers accessing their preferred locations, young people heading to swimming areas, residents assisting one another. It represented our small community's core. Upon inheriting this property, my spouse Sarah and I envisioned our future. We'd accumulated savings carefully, intending to retire there eventually. I planned to renovate the cabin, perhaps conduct consulting remotely, and spend mornings fishing from that aged wooden pier. The familiar creaking of weathered boards beneath my feet felt comforting. Then Linda Prescott entered the picture. Linda exemplifies someone who accessorizes grocery shopping with pearls and operates an immaculate white luxury vehicle that's never encountered unpaved roads. She relocated to the Whispering Pines exclusive development 2 years prior. This upscale subdivision had appeared across the lake like fungi after rainfall. Within 6 months, she'd secured the HOA presidency through strategic maneuvering that I should have anticipated trouble when the initial certified correspondence arrived. The envelope carried that substantial weight that triggers anxiety before opening. Inside, Linda's formal letterhead declared my bridge violated community design standards and required removal. I actually laughed aloud. My bridge existed when her subdivision was still grazing land. However, Linda had researched thoroughly, or believed she had. The letter referenced HOA Regulation 47B regarding architectural approval requirements, threatening $500 daily penalties if I failed to remove the bridge within 30 days. I then began examining containers in my grandfather's attic, aged, dusty papers with legal significance. I located original survey documentation, property records, and crucially, the grandfather provision specifically protecting existing structures. My bridge predated the HOA by 8 decades. Armed with documentation, I attended the following HOA gathering at the community facility. You recognize that particular institutional building scent: floor polish, stale coffee, and subtle disappointment. This introduced me to HOA politics. I displayed my documents across the folding table like revealing a winning poker hand. "Distinguished members," I stated, "I believe we have a misunderstanding here." Linda barely acknowledged my paperwork. Her reply still infuriates me. "Times evolve, Mr. Morrison. Progress demands sacrifices." She spoke with patronizing condescension, as though explaining elementary concepts to a child. The board's decision was predetermined: 5 supporting enforcement, 2 opposing. Linda's supporters, recent wealthy arrivals lacking common sense, outvoted longtime residents who understood community values. Departing that meeting, gravel crunching beneath my steps, I recognized something important. This wasn't about design guidelines or community planning. This concerned power. Linda observed my modest bridge, working-class cabin, and worn pickup truck, deciding I didn't match her upscale neighborhood vision. She wanted my departure. Sarah attempted maintaining optimism. "We'll fight this united," she said during dinner, squeezing my hand across our modest kitchen table. "The law supports you." I nodded and smiled, privately questioning whether being correct would suffice. What I hadn't yet realized was that Linda had challenged the wrong engineer. I didn't merely understand building regulations and property law. I understood water systems. Linda wasted no time escalating from threats to action. 3 days following that board gathering, I'm departing for work when I noticed two identically dressed men standing near my property boundary. Security personnel at 7 in the morning midweek. "Good morning, gentlemen," I called out, coffee cup in hand. "Are you lost?" The older individual, built like a former football player, produced a clipboard. "HOA compliance enforcement, sir. We're recording violations." I nearly choked on my beverage. Violations like what? Grass height exceeds HOA's 3-inch standard in numerous areas. Dock needs repainting according to aesthetic requirements. Storage shed requires pressure cleaning. He recited this like reading a shopping list. Throughout the following 2 weeks, these individuals documented everything except breathing too loudly. My mailbox was supposedly the incorrect black shade. My doormat violated size specifications. They even cited me for having visible fishing equipment from the roadway. By the 3rd week, I faced $1,200 in penalties. I then did what any competent engineer does when confronting problems. I investigated the system. Linda's husband, Rick, operated Prescott Security Solutions. Convenient, correct? The HOA was compensating her husband's company $3,000 monthly to harass homeowners into compliance. That I spent one evening researching the state contractor licensing database and discovered something interesting. Rick's security credentials had expired 6 months earlier. He'd been operating unlawfully this entire period. Here's useful information for you. In Texas, HOA security must maintain licensing identical to private security companies, and most don't. Always verify their credentials before allowing them to cite you for violations. That I wasn't finished investigating. I contacted a friend who conducts commercial inspections. We conducted a casual walk around Linda's immaculate property one Saturday morning. Her deck addition, no permits. Her pool house constructed 6 inches beyond the setback boundary. That elaborate Japanese garden she took such pride in. According to original surveys I discovered, it extended 3 feet onto my land. Linda had been trespassing for 3 years. The following Monday, I submitted complaints to the state licensing authority regarding Rick's security operation and requested a complete property line survey. I didn't make this theatrical, just handled it like any engineering problem. Document comprehensively, follow appropriate procedures, let evidence speak independently. Linda's response was predictable. Within a week, I began hearing rumors at the hardware store. "Jake Morrison's been uncooperative. He's diminishing property values with that unsightly bridge. Some individuals just don't comprehend progress." Sarah returned from grocery shopping one Thursday, appearing frustrated. "The cashier barely acknowledged me," she said, "and Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop treated me like I had a contagious illness." Anonymous complaints then began arriving. Someone contacted the county alleging my bridge was structurally hazardous. Another informant reported I was disposing chemicals in the lake. Hilarious, since I'm an environmental engineer who professionally tests water quality. However, Linda made her initial significant error here. While she played neighborhood politician, I was doing what I excel at, reading technical documentation. I'd submitted public records requests for anything concerning water rights and dam operations around our lake. What I discovered in those County files made me sit upright at my kitchen table. Maps I'd never seen before showed water flow patterns from the 1920s. Engineering reports from my great-grandfather's era existed. Most intriguingly, documentation of something called secondary water rights that had never transferred to the HOA. I spent that weekend walking around the lake with a surveyor's perspective, truly observing how water moved. The resort Linda constantly boasted about, the one supposedly bringing sophistication to our community, had a serious vulnerability. Their entire operation depended on consistent water levels. Their boat facilities, lakefront dining, million-dollar water features. Everything assumed the lake would remain exactly where it was. The diesel fuel smell still lingered from their construction machinery, and I could taste the irony. Linda was so fixated on my small stone bridge that she'd never bothered understanding the larger picture, but I drove home that evening with new understanding of my situation. Linda believed she was playing chess, moving her HOA pieces around the board to force my departure. However, she didn't realize I wasn't just another homeowner she could intimidate. I was the individual who understood how water systems functioned. Linda's next move arrived with the subtlety of a freight train. I'm sitting in my home office one Tuesday morning when I hear trucks arriving outside. Not just one truck, 3 county vehicles, and a man in a hard hat carrying the type of clipboard that ruins your day. Jake Morrison. The inspector looked like he'd prefer being elsewhere. Anonymous tip about structural concerns with your bridge. I'm here to conduct a safety evaluation. Anonymous tip. Correct. I could practically smell Linda's expensive perfume lingering in the morning air. The inspection lasted 4 hours. This unfortunate individual crawled over every inch of my great-grandfather's stonework with measuring tools and moisture detectors. When he finished, he had the decency to appear embarrassed. Mr. Morrison, your bridge is solid as when originally built. However, he consulted his clipboard. Current regulations require seismic reinforcement for structures this size. Estimated compliance cost is $3,000. You have 10 days to submit improvement plans or we'll need to condemn it. $3,000 for earthquake protection in Texas, where the largest seismic event in living memory occurred when they blasted rock for the new highway. However, Linda got clever here. The inspector handed me a business card with the citation. Prescott Construction can handle the work. Rick Prescott provided me a quote for $12,000. Says he can complete it within a week. I stared at that business card like it was a serpent. Rick Prescott, Linda's husband, volunteering to fix the problem his wife created for $12,000. What a coincidence. That evening, I made phone calls. Started with the State Contractor Licensing Board, where a very helpful woman named Maria accessed Rick's file. Sir, Mr. Prescott's contractor license expired 24 months ago. He's not legally authorized to perform construction work for compensation. Next call went to my friend at the county building department. Jake, that seismic requirement only applies to new construction and major renovations. Existing structures are grandfathered unless they're actually unsafe. Here's your second useful information. Water rights in the American West often predate modern property law. They can override HOA regulations, zoning ordinances, and sometimes even eminent domain. Armed with this information, I decided to investigate those water rights documents more thoroughly. What I found in the county archives made my hands tremble. My great-grandfather hadn't just constructed a bridge and cabin. He'd held secondary water rights to the entire lake system, granted back when this was still ranch territory. Those rights included something called flow management authority. In straightforward language, I could legally control how much water remained in the lake. That I spent the following 2 days studying engineering reports from the 1920s dam construction. Fascinating material, truly. The original designers constructed bypass channels that could redirect water around the main dam. My great-grandfather's bridge wasn't merely transportation. It was positioned to control a secondary spillway system. Meanwhile, Linda was busy playing her reputation game. She'd somehow convinced 3 of my neighbors that I was unstable and potentially dangerous. I came home one evening to find new security cameras pointed directly at my property from 2 different houses. Sarah noticed initially. Dear, Mrs. Rodriguez won't even wave anymore. And Tom at the marina treated me like I was carrying plague when I stopped for bait. The breaking point arrived when Linda filed for a restraining order, claiming I'd made threatening statements about the dam and posed a clear and present danger to community safety. The judge reviewed her evidence, which consisted entirely of my public records requests and my questions at HOA meetings, and dismissed it. However, the damage was done. Half the neighborhood now considered me some sort of unhinged domestic terrorist. That I then made a discovery that changed everything. I was reviewing the resort's environmental impact study when I noticed something in the fine print. Their bank loan had very specific requirements about water levels. If the lake dropped below a certain depth, their entire $4 million loan would become immediately due. The resort's grand opening was 3 months away. Deposits had been collected for weddings, corporate retreats, fishing tournaments. Linda's family had invested $500,000 of their own money in the project. I sat in my kitchen that night staring at those loan documents and realized something profound. Linda thought she was fighting a battle about HOA rules and property aesthetics. However, she'd picked a fight with someone who understood the one thing her entire development depended on. Water doesn't care about HOA bylaws. It flows according to physics and legal precedent. and I was beginning to understand that I held more power than any HOA president ever could. The metallic taste of stress had been my constant companion for weeks. However, that night, it was replaced by something else entirely. The taste of possibility. Linda's patience finally broke the week before Thanksgiving. I'm checking my mailbox when I see her marching across the street in those ridiculous white heels, clutching another manila envelope like it contained nuclear launch codes. Mr. Morrison. Her voice could have cut glass. I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting. Your bridge represents an immediate safety crisis that cannot wait for normal procedures. She thrust the envelope at me with enough force to give me a paper cut. Inside was a notice for a crisis intervention meeting scheduled for the next evening. The agenda was simple: vote to authorize immediate bridge removal with or without my consent. The meeting was a circus. Linda had imported her golf partner from Dallas, some individual claiming to be a structural engineer who'd never actually seen my bridge but was happy to declare it a death trap. His presentation included phrases like catastrophic failure risk and imminent public danger. Real professional material. The vote was swift and merciless, 7-1 in favor of immediate removal. The lone dissent came from Mrs. Chun, an 80-year-old woman who'd lived here since the 1960s. Everyone else had either been bought, intimidated, or convinced that I was some kind of bridge-building madman. Contractor will begin tomorrow morning, Linda announced with barely concealed glee. Removal fees of $15,000 will be added to Mr. Morrison's account. If payment is not received within 30 days, a lien will be placed on the property. $15,000 to destroy something my great-grandfather built with his own hands. I drove home in a fog. The rough texture of my steering wheel was the only thing keeping me grounded. Sarah took one look at my face and poured 2 glasses of wine without saying a word. That night, I did something I'd never done before in my engineering career. I filed an emergency injunction in county court. Not because I was confident it would work, but because I was out of other options. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. the next morning, exactly when Linda's contractor was supposed to start demolition. I walked into that courthouse at 8:30 carrying a banker's box full of documents, water rights records, contractor licensing violations, evidence of HOA fund misuse, and structural reports proving my bridge was safer than most county roads. Judge Martinez listened for exactly 12 minutes before making his decision. Emergency injunction granted. 30-day temporary restraining order issued. Mr. Morrison, you have 1 month to resolve this matter through proper legal channels. I called Linda from the courthouse parking lot. Demolition's canceled, I said. You might want to tell your contractor. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Then, this is war, Mr. Morrison. I hope you understand that. Here's knowledge nugget number 3. Emergency injunctions can halt HOA actions if you can demonstrate immediate irreversible harm. But you need documented evidence, not just angry feelings. That afternoon, I discovered something that made Linda's declaration of war feel almost quaint. I was reviewing HOA financial records, which are public documents, by the way, when I noticed some interesting discrepancies. Over the past year, Linda had authorized $30,000 in legal consultations and emergency contractor services. Every single payment went to companies owned by her husband or her brother-in-law. I spent the weekend playing forensic accountant, cross-referencing every payment with business licenses and corporate filings. Linda hadn't just been using HOA funds to harass me. She'd been treating the community treasury like her personal piggy bank. However, the real revelation came when I found the lake's original engineering survey from 1923. My great-grandfather hadn't just built a bridge. He'd positioned it as a control structure for what the old documents called secondary flow management. The bridge wasn't just crossing the water. It was part of a larger water control system that included the main dam. I spent hours studying those faded blueprints, the musty smell of old paper filling my kitchen as I traced water flow patterns with my finger. The more I understood about the original design, the more I realized Linda had made a catastrophic error in judgment. She thought she was fighting some working-class individual with a stubborn streak. However, my great-grandfather had been the chief engineer on this entire lake system. He'd built redundancy and control into every structure, including his bridge. That Sunday evening, I called my old professor from Texas A&M, an individual who specialized in historical water rights law. After I explained the situation, He was quiet for a long moment. "Jake," he finally said, "if what you're telling me is accurate, you don't just own a bridge. You own water management authority for that entire lake system. That's not an HOA matter anymore. That's federal water rights law." I hung up the phone and walked out to my dock. The taste of November air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of coming winter. For the first time in months, I smiled. Linda had declared war, but she had no idea what weapons I was about to bring to the fight. The lake dropped exactly 18.5 inches over the next 6 hours. By sunset, the resort's million-dollar boat docks were sitting in mud, and their grand opening weekend was officially canceled. The bank called their loan that same evening. However, here's the thing about water. It's patient and it's fair. Within 24 hours, I'd restored normal flow to the lake. The investors, suddenly very interested in negotiating with the individual who controlled their water supply, made me an offer I could actually respect. "Mr. Morrison," said James Chun, the lead investor, "we'd like to propose a partnership. You maintain your bridge as a historic landmark. We get guaranteed water levels, and everyone wins." 3 months later, the resort reopened under new management. Linda was long gone. Last I heard, she'd moved to Arizona after facing federal charges for attempted bribery and misuse of HOA funds. Her husband Rick lost his contractor's license permanently and had to sell their house to pay legal fees. The new HOA board, led by Mrs. Chun and Tom Rodriguez, established the Morrison Bridge Historic District. My great-grandfather's bridge became the centerpiece of a community heritage trail that actually brought more tourists than Linda's exclusive resort vision ever could have. Property values didn't collapse like Linda had predicted. They actually increased. Turns out people like living in communities with authentic history and neighbors who look out for each other rather than corporate developments run like private kingdoms. Sarah and I used our newfound local celebrity to establish the Samuel Morrison Water Rights Scholarship for engineering students at Texas A&M, funded by speaking fees from the dozen water rights conferences where I've told this story. It's already helped 5 students study environmental engineering. The first recipient was Maria Rodriguez, Tom's daughter, who wants to specialize in sustainable water management. She'll graduate next spring and has already accepted a position with the State Water Authority. The ceremony was held on the bridge, naturally, with the entire community celebrating together. Tom got promoted to resort manager and rehired all the employees Linda had laid off during her reign of terror. The resort now donates 5% of its profits to local schools and sponsors an annual Bridge Day festival that celebrates our community's history. Frank Wilson came out of retirement to train me on advanced dam operations, and I've become the official water management consultant for 3 other lake communities facing similar HOA disputes. Turns out there are a lot of Lindas out there, and a lot of forgotten water rights waiting to be rediscovered. The legal precedent we set has been cited in 12 other federal water rights cases across Texas. Patricia tells me we've probably prevented dozens of communities from getting bulldozed by developers who thought money could override century-old LAW. My bridge is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Every morning I walk across those limestone blocks my great-grandfather laid with his own hands, and I can almost hear him chuckling about how his water management system saved the day. The resort thrives. The community is stronger than ever. And our little lake has become a model for how development and history can coexist when people choose cooperation over domination. That Linda's story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked HOA power. Last month, the state legislature passed the Morrison Act, requiring all HOA boards to respect pre-existing water rights and historic structures. Small victories, but they add up. Sarah and I are expecting our first child next spring. They'll grow up running across that old stone bridge, learning to fish from the same dock where I learned from my grandfather. Some legacies are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible. The best part, our new neighbors actually like having us around. We've become the go-to family for community barbecues, and I've helped 3 different homeowners navigate their own HOA disputes without anyone having to drain any lakes. However, if you're dealing with your own HOA nightmare, remember this. Knowledge is power. History matters. And sometimes the best weapon against bureaucratic bullying is understanding the law better than the bullies do. Drop a comment with your own HOA horror story. I read every one, and I've got ideas for dealing with these petty tyrants. And if you want to hear about the corrupt city council that tried to steal an elderly farmer's land through eminent domain and how century-old mineral rights saved her farm, hit that subscribe button. That's a story for next time. The sound of children's laughter echoes off the old stone bridge now, mixed with the gentle lap of water that knows exactly where it belongs. Friday morning brought the kind of chaos that makes you question reality. I'm drinking coffee on my porch when 3 sheriff's deputies pull up, followed by Linda in her pristine BMW and 2 individuals in expensive suits who screamed federal lawyers. Jake Morrison, the lead deputy, looked apologetic. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of criminal threatening and conspiracy to commit environmental terrorism. Environmental terrorism for exercising legal water rights my family had held for a century. Patricia had warned me this might happen. Within 2 hours, I was bonded out and sitting in her Austin office while she worked her magic with federal authorities. Turns out, Linda's Blackstone lawyers had convinced a federal judge that my water rights posed an imminent threat to interstate commerce and environmental stability. The restraining order was comprehensive. I couldn't approach the dam, couldn't operate any water controls, couldn't even discuss water management in public. Linda had essentially used the federal court system to neutralize my only leverage. However, Patricia smiled when she read the full order. "Jake, they just made a huge mistake. This restraining order acknowledges your water rights exist. They're just temporarily restricting them. That's federal recognition of your claim." Within 6 hours, Patricia had filed her own federal lawsuit asserting water rights violation under the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899. More importantly, she'd obtained a counter-injunction that superseded the local restraining order. "Federal water rights trump local criminal complaints every time," she explained. "Linda's lawyers gave us exactly the precedent we needed." Here's a crucial knowledge nugget. Federal water rights enforcement can override local law enforcement actions when historical claims predate state and local jurisdiction. However, Linda wasn't done with her scorched earth campaign. That afternoon, I discovered she'd hired a private security firm to patrol the dam area 24 hours a day. Not just any security firm. Ex-military contractors who looked like they'd stepped out of an action movie. Sarah came home from the grocery store with news that made my stomach drop. "Dear, there are news trucks at the end of our street, and Mrs. Patterson said Linda's been telling people you're planning to poison the water supply." Poison the water supply. Linda had officially jumped from harassment into full-blown character assassination. The media circus exploded over the weekend. Local TV stations ran stories about domestic eco-terrorism and water rights extremism. Linda appeared on 3 different news programs playing the role of concerned community leader protecting innocent families from a deranged individual with dangerous expertise. However, the media attention worked both ways. By Sunday, property rights organizations from across Texas were calling to offer support. Environmental lawyers were volunteering their services. Even some resort employees were quietly reaching out to say they supported my position. The community was splitting down the middle. Longtime residents who remembered my great-grandfather rallied around my family's history. Newer residents, terrified their property values would tank, sided with Linda's development vision. Monday brought the nuclear option Linda had been building toward. The HOA board called an emergency community protection meeting to authorize any and all measures necessary to prevent me from accessing the dam. They'd essentially voted to hire armed guards to stop me from exercising federally protected water rights. That's when Frank Wilson made a decision that changed everything. He called me at 6 o'clock in the morning with an offer that made my hands shake. "Jake, I've been operating this dam for 30 years. Never seen such a mess over something so simple. I'm retiring effective immediately, and I'm recommending you as interim dam operator under your water rights authority." Interim dam operator, with federal water rights and official operational authority. Linda's private security couldn't legally stop me from doing routine maintenance, including testing the secondary flow channels. The final piece fell into place when Tom Rodriguez called with information that would destroy Linda's credibility forever. He'd been wearing a wire during his conversations with the sheriff's department, documenting Linda's attempted bribery. "Jake, she offered me $15,000 yesterday. Said if I could make it look like you sabotaged the controls yourself, she'd make sure I got a promotion and a raise. I've got it all recorded. $15,000 for false testimony." Linda had crossed from civil disputes into federal felony territory. That evening, I sat with Sarah on our dock, listening to the gentle lap of water against the pilings. The smell of approaching rain hung heavy in the air, and I could taste the electricity of the coming storm. Tomorrow's the day, I told her. Linda's made her choice, and now I have to make mine. Sarah squeezed my hand. Your great-grandfather would be proud. Sometimes standing up for what's right means making hard choices. Tuesday morning, Linda would learn that some battles aren't won by whoever has the most expensive lawyers or the loudest media campaign. Sometimes they're won by whoever best understands the law, the physics of water, and the weight of family legacy. Tuesday morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of day that makes everything seem sharper, more defined. I arrived at the dam at 8 a.m. with Patricia, Frank, and a small army of media representatives who had been following the story. Linda was already there with her private security team, 3 sheriff's deputies, and enough lawyers to staff a small firm. She'd positioned herself between me and the dam controls like some kind of environmental custer making her last stand. You will not pass, she announced to the gathering crowd, her voice carrying that particular pitch of desperation disguised as authority. I am protecting this community from a dangerous individual who threatens our way of life. Channel 8 News had set up cameras. The county sheriff himself had come to oversee what everyone knew would be the final confrontation. Even some resort investors had driven down from Dallas, probably calculating how much money they stood to lose. That I walked up to the concrete housing that concealed the bypass controls, carrying the folder containing a century of legal documentation and Frank's official letter transferring dam operation authority to me. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced to the crowd, my voice carrying across the morning air, I'm here to perform routine maintenance on secondary water management systems that have been operated by my family since 1923. Linda stepped directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the acrid scent of panic sweat. I have a federal restraining order preventing you from approaching this equipment. Patricia stepped forward smoothly, handing a document to the sheriff. Your Honor, that restraining order was superseded by federal water rights enforcement yesterday evening. Mr. Morrison has full legal authority to operate these systems. The sheriff read the document carefully, nodded, and stepped aside. Ma'am, he has federal jurisdiction here. You need to move back. That's when Linda truly lost it. This is insane, she screamed at the cameras. You're going to let this lunatic destroy a $4 million investment because of some piece of paper from 1923? People like him don't belong in our community. People like him. On live television, Linda had just revealed exactly what this fight had always been about. Not HOA rules or architectural standards or community safety. This was about class, about who deserved to belong in her vision of an exclusive lakefront paradise. That I knelt down beside the concrete housing and began removing the access panel with tools Frank had provided. Each bolt came loose with the metallic ring of finality, and I could hear the crowd holding its collective breath. Mr. Morrison called a reporter from Channel 8. Can you explain exactly what you're doing? I'm opening secondary flow channels that were designed by my great-grandfather in 1923. I replied, not looking up from my work. These channels allow controlled release of excess water during maintenance operations. Everything I'm doing is completely legal under federal water rights law and normal dam operation procedures. The access panel came free, revealing the massive brass wheel that controlled the bypass valves. Frank had oiled the mechanism the week before, and it turned with surprising ease for something nearly a century old. Linda made one final desperate attempt to stop me. Sheriff, he's going to drain our lake. He's destroying private property. Arrest him. Sheriff Martinez looked at her with the patient expression of a man who dealt with too many HOA disputes. Ma'am, this is federal jurisdiction and legal dam operations. I can't arrest a man for turning a valve he has legal authority to operate. I gave the wheel 3 full turns clockwise. Somewhere deep in the dam structure, century-old mechanisms responded exactly as Samuel Morrison had designed them. Water began flowing through the secondary channels with a deep, throaty rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. The crowd watched in fascination as the lake level began dropping at a visible rate. Within 20 minutes, you could see the water line receding from the resort's dock pilings. Linda stood frozen, watching her $4 million investment literally draining away. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. You can't do this. You can't just destroy everything we've built. I stood up, brushing dirt off my hands, and faced the cameras for my final statement. Mrs. Prescott, I offered you compromise. I offered you negotiation. I offered you respect for both your investment and my family's legacy. You chose war instead. This is what losing a water rights war looks like. The resort's boat docks were already becoming unusable. By evening, the entire shoreline would be exposed mud. Linda's grand opening scheduled for the following weekend would be a disaster. However, the most beautiful sound of the morning wasn't the rushing water or the clicking cameras. It was Mrs. Chin's voice carrying clearly across the crowd. Welcome home, Jake. Your great-grandfather would be proud.